Have you ever wondered how big the consequences of a tiny mistake can be? Well, we're about to dive into a legal case that started with, of all things, a simple typo in an email. But this wasn't just any typo. This was a mistake that snowballed into a massive UK Supreme Court showdown, with hundreds of thousands of pounds hanging in the balance.
And this is the number right at the heart of our story. Over £300,000. That's the exact amount of money a bank, NRAM, lost because it acted on that one single incorrect email. And you better believe they fought tooth and nail to get that money back from the person who sent it.
So how on earth did we get here? Well, the timeline is actually pretty straightforward. First, a bank gives a business loan, secured against some property. Simple enough. Later, the borrower wants to sell some of that property, and their solicitor shoots off an email to the bank. The bank reads the email, acts on it, releases their security, and only later realizes, whoops, they've been left with a gigantic shortfall.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this whole thing down. First, we'll zero in on the exact mistake. Then, we'll look at the dispute it caused. After that, we'll unpack the legal test the court had to use before we get to the big reveal, the final verdict. And then we'll wrap it all up with the key takeaway you need to know.
Right, let's start at the beginning, with the source of all the chaos. We're talking about just a few lines of text in an email that had these massive, completely unintended consequences. So here's the error, and it's deceptively simple. The borrower was selling a property to pay off part of their loan. But the email their solicitor sent to the bank, it mistakenly said the sale would repay the entire loan. That one word, entire, was the whole problem, the critical misrepresentation.
And that one little word sets up the entire conflict. Suddenly, the bank is out over £300,000, and they're pointing the finger straight at the solicitor. So the question becomes, who pays for this? Who has to shoulder the cost of this massive error?
You can really see the two sides digging in here. The bank, NRAM, basically said, look, we know we're a bank, but it's totally reasonable to trust a direct statement from a professional solicitor. Her carelessness cost us a fortune. But the solicitor, Ms. Steele, fired right back. Her argument, hang on, my duty is to my client, the borrower, not you. It's completely unreasonable for a big-shot lender like you to just rely on my email without doing a basic check of your own loan document. So how does a court even begin to untangle a mess like this? They don't just flip a coin. They apply a very specific legal test. And in cases like this, it all boils down to a key idea called assumption of responsibility.
Now, this idea is built on a famous legal concept called the Headley-Byrne principle. And what that says, in a nutshell, is that if you have a special skill, like, say, a lawyer, and you give information to someone else, knowing they're probably going to rely on it, you might just have a legal duty to be careful, even if you don't have a contract with them.
So that principle gets broken down into a really practical three-part test for the court. First, they ask, was it actually reasonable for the bank to rely on that email? Second, should the solicitor have known the bank would rely on it? And then the big one, number 3, did the solicitor, by sending that email, voluntarily assume responsibility for it being accurate? So, with the facts on the table and the legal test ready to go, this case climbed all the way to the UK's highest court. It's time to get to the verdict and see exactly how the Supreme Court justices finally solved this very expensive puzzle.
So, here it is, the big question. After all of that, was the solicitor on the hook? Did the court say, yep, you made the mistake, you have to pay the bank back all that money?
And the answer from the Supreme Court was a clear, firm, and maybe even surprising no. The solicitor, Ms. Steele, was not liable for the bank's loss.
And this quote from Lord Wilson's judgment really just hits the nail on the head. He said it was, and I quote, unreasonable for a commercial lender to rely upon a representation from the borrower's solicitor without checking for itself. He cut right to the heart of it.
So why not? Well, the court's decision really came down to a few key things. First, Enron wasn't just some person off the street. It's a sophisticated commercial party. Second, the solicitor was very clearly working for the other side. This wasn't a friendly chat. Her email was also super brief. It wasn't some formal legal guarantee. And here's the real knockout blow. The bank had the right answer in their own files the whole time. They had the original loan documents. They could have checked the facts in minutes.
Okay, so this whole story is more than just a legal drama. The Supreme Court's verdict sends a really clear signal with huge implications for pretty much any professional or business out there. So what's the big takeaway from all this?
While the lessons really cut both ways,
If you're a professional, the message is that your duty of care isn't infinite. Context really matters. But, the safest play is still to use clear disclaimers. And if you're a business, the lesson is even more blunt. Do your homework. You can't just blindly rely on what the other side's advisor tells you. You have to do your own due diligence and always ask yourself, is my reliance on this info actually reasonable?
When you boil it all down, this ruling really just reinforces a fundamental idea of doing business. Yes, professionals have responsibilities, but they aren't limitless. And at the same time, big commercial players are expected to be savvy and take basic steps to protect themselves. You just can't blame someone else when you failed to check the facts that you had at your own fingertips.
And that kind of leaves us with one final, very important question to think about. In our world of instant emails and quick messages, where communication is faster and more informal than ever, this case forces us to ask, where do we draw that line? Where does a professional's responsibility for their words end, and where does plain old commercial common sense begin?